What's up everyone, and welcome back to the series. In this video we're going to be looking at middleware. We've so far been able to look at things like dependency injection, error handling, and other concepts in FastAPI. But I thought before we conclude the series, let us look at the concept of middleware. So middleware are basically functions that sit in between our requests and our responses. By this I mean functions that we can define to modify how we are going to handle a request before passing it to the route handler, and how we can pass a response, or how we can handle a response before actually returning it to the client. Now I've created a simple diagram right here. I am not the best at making these diagrams, but I think this will kind of give you an idea about how middleware work. So just like you see right here, middleware sit in between the server or the route handling functions and then the client who is going to make a request to our server. So when you have your middleware, this can be able to do a variety of things. You can check for authentication, you can be able to modify headers in your request or your response before actually sending them to wherever they are going to be handled. So for example here, when a client makes a request to our server, the middleware will get the request, perform actions on that request, and then send the request to the request handler function. That happens the same way for the response. When you're making a response from the server, you're going to pass it via the middleware that will go ahead and perform actions on that response, and then after you'll be able to return that response. Now this is a very nice way in which you can go ahead and modify some of the ways FastAPI works. You can go ahead and do things like logging. In fact, we're going to be looking at a logging example in our video. You can customize exceptions, we can customize error handling and perform authorization and so much more. And you can also be able to use third-party ASGI middleware, just like I'll show you in the video. So to start, we're going to create a simple middleware that's going to be responsible for allowing us to modify how FastAPI logs our logs. So for example, whenever I make a request to our server, we get a log inside our terminal that shows the path through which we made that request and some other details about that specific request. We're going to modify it and we're going to make it look a little bit more detailed in our video. So to start, I'm going to go ahead and first of all show you some of the changes that I've done to the application. So remember, in our error handling video, we went ahead and made all the errors to be registered within our danda-init.py in our source folder. I went ahead and modified this to create the register all errors function that is going to go ahead and perform all those actions in a function that has the app instance, which is our FastAPI instance. So once we define this function, it takes in an app instance, which is a FastAPI instance. We then go ahead and call that function to run all our exception handlers, just like you see right here, with our app instance that we created for our application. So we're going to do the same thing for middleware. So what I'm going to do is to go within our source folder right here. I'm going to start by creating a new file. So this is actually going to be a new file, and I'm going to call this new file middleware.py. So inside our middleware.py, we are going to first of all begin by importing the FastAPI class. So I'll say from FastAPI, we are going to go ahead and import FastAPI. And once you've imported FastAPI, now we're going to create a function that's going to take in an app instance. So I'm just going to come right here and create this function. So this is going to be our register. So we are simply going to call this our register middleware function. And this will also take in our app instance. So this will be our FastAPI app instance. So we can pass this for now, and what we need to do at first is to go within our errors.py. We are going to need to, actually need to go within our danda-init and then import that function. So I'm going to do that by saying from.middleware. We are going to go ahead and import our register middleware function. And once we've been able to do that, now we shall come right down after registering our errors. We are going to go and register our error or register our middleware, and what we shall provide is going to be the app instance. So now this keeps our danda-init.py clean, and the only thing that we have is only those lines of code that are going to register our routers. So those are the ones that are going to be the most in this file. So right after we've done that, let us go ahead and create a simple logging middleware. So if we went back to RESTFolks right here and try to make a request to an endpoint, we now see that our token is invalid. But one thing we can notice is that FastAPI is going to log that request within our console. So our signature verification is expired, so that token is expired. But for now, we can only handle that and return a 401 unauthorized error. So we see that FastAPI is going ahead and logging this request in the console and also showing us the response that is being returned. What if we wanted to customize this to make it in a way that is custom or changed in a way that is more detailed, and we may actually include things like the time it took for that request to happen? So that's where middleware can be used. So to begin, we are going to go ahead and create that middleware. So a middleware is simply a function, and for us to create a custom middleware in FastAPI, we can go ahead and use our app instance to create a decorator that we shall use to decorate a function. Then whatever code that will be within that function will be our middleware. So for example, if we went ahead and said at app.middleware, so this is the middleware decorator, it's going to take in the type of middleware that we want to create. Now you can create one for your HTTP, so that will be our HTTP middleware. You can create that's specific to, let's say, our WebSockets and so on. But for our case, since we are dealing with an HTTP server, we can just go ahead and say that this is going to be our HTTP middleware. And once we've been able to do that, then we can go ahead and define the function that's going to be run within our middleware. So we're going to define an async function. So I'll say async def, and for our case, we shall say custom logging, or we shall just simply come right here and say that this is going to be our custom logging. So this custom logging middleware is going to take in two things. So every middleware function is going to take in the request for which we want to pass that middleware. So in this case, we are going to provide the request object. Now this request object is going to be of type request, so I have to go ahead and import that as well. So I'll say from FastAPI, we are going to go ahead and import. Actually, we need to enter the request module. So that's going to be within FastAPI.requests. We shall go ahead and import request. Once we've been able to achieve that, then we are now going to go ahead and provide that type in here. And then after doing that, we shall have to provide call next. So there are two things to observe here. The request parameter is going to be that request that you want to pass to the middleware before we pass it on to the route handler. And then the call next is going to be either another middleware that's going to be registered on our app, as well as any path handler or route handler that we've defined. If we go within our route.py for, let's say, our authentication, we have a simple route for signing up. So whenever we use a middleware onto this specific route, we may be able to go ahead and first of all get the response on our sign up. But before it reaches this function to handle that specific request, it will pass through the middleware, get processed, and then hit the route handler. So I hope you understand that. So when you go back right here, the call next is going to be that specific route handler or any other middleware that will be needed to process that specific request. So to move on, we are going to start by first of all getting the current time. So to do that, we're going to be making use of our time module. So I'll say import time. And once I've imported time, I'm going to go ahead and keep track of the current time. So to do that, we can create a variable called the start time. And that start time in this case is going to be time. So this is going to create an object that's going to be standing for the current time. And once we've been able to do that, then we can go ahead and first of all get our response. So to get our response, all we need to do is to go ahead and call this call next function with the current request as an argument. So basically what that does is to go ahead and set up our response object. So to do that, we shall say that our response is going to be equal to await. And for our case, we can go ahead and say this is going to be our call next. So that's going to also be an async function. Then what we shall do is to go ahead and provide the current request. So once that is done, we can now calculate the processing time for this request. So normally, when we are done processing the request with our middleware, all we do is to go ahead and return our response. So I'll say return response. And once I've been able to do that, then we're going to go ahead and process everything we need to do before the request is done, or before the request is handled in here. And then we shall also have to handle everything that is going to be done before the response is returned under here. So for example, let's say we wanted to go ahead and say that this is what is going to happen before the request, or before the request is actually passed on to our route handler. So in this case, we can say a print before, and then we can do the same thing right here and say print after. So this is going to show us where the request is beginning and where the response is being returned. So for our case, we can print the start time, and then we can go ahead and also get the end time, or we can actually get the time for which the request has been processed. So to do that, I'll come right here and say that we're going to have our processing time being equal to time, which is going to be the current time after the response has been created, minus the start time. So once we have that, then we can say print processed after, and then we can provide the process time. So once we've been able to do that and our middleware has been registered onto our app, we can now finally go ahead and make use of our middleware. So if we pull up our server is running. So let's try to make a simple request. So I'll send the same request. Now we shall see that this is now going to print that this request has been processed after this time. But we can also notice that it's going to print that the time before the request was processed is going to be this, and then after the request was processed, we can get the processing time, which is going to be after this amount of seconds. So this is basically how that middleware will work. It will go ahead and get the request, process it before returning a response, return the response, and then process the response before it is returned to the client. So now that we've been able to understand that, let us go ahead and modify our logging. So to modify our logging, the first thing we shall do is to go ahead and first of all disable FastAPI's initial logging, or UVcon's initial logging that we are using right here. So we're going to go ahead and make. So we're going to begin by first of all modifying the way FastAPI is logging our responses. So to do that, we are going to be making use of the logging module. So we shall go ahead and import that. Shall say import logging dot. So this is going to be our logging. And the first thing we shall have to do is to get the logger that we're using to log. And that is going to be our UVcon logger. So to get the logger, we are going to be making use of logging dot get logger. So all we need to do is to go ahead and provide the name of the logger that we're using in here. So for our case, it's going to be UVcon dot access. So that's going to be the one to log all these requests and the details about those requests and responses. So if we want to disable it, all we have to do is to just come right here and say logger dot disabled, and then we can set that to false. Or actually it's going to be true since we are disabling it. So once that is done, whenever we try to make a request, so let's try to make a request right here. When we go back to our terminal, we shall see that no information is being printed about the response that is being returned. And that is what we want. So we want to go ahead and set up our custom logger that's going to log information about the request as it has happened, and we shall have the request URL, the method that's being used to make the request, as well as the process time for that request. So what we're going to do is to first of all create the message that we want to go ahead and log. So to do that, I'll come right here and say message. So our message is going to be an F string. And for our case, we want to go ahead and get the request time. So all those can be accessed within the request object right here. So you can go ahead and say request dot, in this case we can get the path, so we can say we can actually begin with the method, so you can say request dot method and then space, then we want to go ahead and we can say request dot method dash, then we provide the path, so you can say request dot url dot, so we can get all the components of the URL right here. So for our case it's going to be the path, and then after providing the path, so this is going to be get slash, let's say, books, and then we can go ahead and provide the time that this request has been completed. So for our case, I think this needs to be done right here, or let's calculate the processing time right down here. Actually, I'll just move the message down because we need to go ahead and return this before we return the response. So I'll come right here, provide the message. So this is where we're going to provide a time, so we can say completed after, and for our case we can go ahead and provide the processing time. So we're going to go ahead and provide the processing time, and since we want this to be in seconds, we shall just provide the s, just like that. So for our messages, we are going to get rid of these print statements, and then we can simply go ahead and provide logging for that. So we can just come right here, and all we shall do is to just go ahead and print our message, and this is going to be what we shall print within our terminal. So if we try to make any more requests to our endpoint within our RESTful here, we shall now go to our logger, and then we shall see that this is going to be a get request to /API /version1 /books /that ID, and then we shall see that that request has been completed in that amount of seconds. So it's just that we have errors right here, so let's go ahead and try to get right credentials for this so that we actually do not get those errors. So if we go to where we get a token pair, we can send a request, we get our new access token. And when we get this new access token, we can now pass it in our authorization header, just like you see right here. And that will be, so we have something wrong. Let's see what is wrong. If I go within our terminal right here, we can see that our n is not defined. I forgot to remove this, so I'll go ahead and get rid of that. And when I get rid of that, we now see that the book is not found, but what is most important is going to be this log that we have here. So when you get the book, we see that get books v1 books, and then the ID is completed under that. Now we can also get the status code or the response status code. So to do that, we can simply go ahead and modify our message to return our response status code by simply going back to our middleware.py, and then we can go ahead and provide the response status code by simply coming in here. So we can just come right here and say response dot, and for our case we shall provide the status code. So when we save and try to make a request again, shall now go within our logs, and now we shall see that get that is going to return the 404 status code, and that will be completed in that amount of seconds. So by just using our middleware, we've been able to set up custom logging for our app. So what I've done here is to also go ahead and add the client who made that specific request. So we can get the details about the client via request.client.host, and then we can also get the port via request.client.port. And that will go ahead and log the IP address of the client that made the request, and we shall also be able to get the method, the path, the response status code, and then we can also see the amount of time it took to complete that request. So what I'm going to do is to go ahead and disable SQL Alchemy Echo, since we do not need it at this point. So what I'll do is to go within our DB main, and what I'll begin doing is to first of all remove the echo attribute so that we only see our logs. So when I save and head over back to our logging, when we try to make any requests, this time we are only going to be getting our logging. So if we try to make any more requests, we shall now see that our logging is the one that's going to be done. And this is how we're going to be using our logging from now and on. So let us look at another example of using middleware. So we're going to set up a simple middleware that's going to check our authorization header, and just in case a request is sent without authorization header, we shall be able to get or raise an error. So this is something that is an alternative to what we did in the series, where we used dependency injection to achieve this thing. So just in case you don't want to go ahead and use dependency injection for your authorization, you can also use your middleware and set up authorization middleware that will be responsible for helping you check if users have provided credentials and if those credentials are valid. So what I'm going to do is to head over back to my middleware.py, and I'm going to create the second middleware. Now this is going to be the authorization middleware. So we shall say app.middleware. So in this case, we shall say app.middleware. This is going to be our HTTP middleware. And then we're going to define this as our authorization. And this will take in our request object and call next. So request is going to be of type request, and call next is going to be also provided. So I forgot that def, so I'll go ahead and provide that. And now we're going to write the code that's going to handle our requests. But one thing we need to keep in mind is that when we set up middleware, this middleware is going to be registered to our app instance, and therefore it's going to work on all endpoints that we shall have within our application, just like we saw for the logging middleware right here. So if we want to go ahead and make that specific middleware that's going to check every request and check if the user has an authorization header, we shall go ahead and first of all check if the authorization header is really found in the request headers. So to do that, we can do something like if authorization is in the request header, so we can access those via request.headers. Then since we are checking for an opposite of this, we can go ahead and do something like if not authorization in request.header, that means a user is not authenticated. Then we can return an error showing them that they are not authenticated. But one thing is we cannot raise exceptions and return them as responses within our middleware. So we have to go ahead and return a JSON response, and that's something that is important to note. When using middleware, you cannot raise an HTTP exception inside middleware. It will be raised as an exception, but it will not be returned as a response, and that is very important to understand. If you want to return some kind of response, all you have to do is to go ahead and return it inside the response right here. So to do that, we have to go ahead and create a response object and then return it in case we hit this error or in case we encounter this error. So I'm going to go ahead and import the JSON response class that's going to allow us to do exactly that. So I'll say from FastAPI, I think I've done a mistake right here. So this is going to be from FastAPI.responses. We are going to go ahead and access the JSON response class. And once we have that, we are now going to go ahead and return. So this is going to be return JSON response, and for our case, we are going to provide our content. Now for this time, we can come and provide the message. So the message can be something like, or let's say not authenticated. So let's just say not authenticated. And we can also give them a way to resolve that by providing a resolution message also. So we can say resolution, and we can simply tell them to provide the right credentials. So we can say, please provide the right credentials to proceed. So when we save, this is going to be added onto our headers, or it's actually going to be added to our request, so that when we make a request, we check if the authorization header is present in the request headers of that request, and then if not, we return the JSON response. So to finish this, we have to go ahead and create our response object. This is going to be got via await call next, and our call next function is going to take in our request object. So let's go ahead and return our response. So that was going to return our response, And when you try to make a request again without our authorization header, of course, we shall see that that's going to be what will happen. So when you go back right here, and let's say we delete our authorization header, when you try to make this request, we shall see that our middleware is going to allow us to return this specific response to show that the user is not authenticated. Now we can also go ahead and return the right status code. For this case, our status code is going to be the one for not authorized. So we can say status. I think I have to go ahead and import that status.http 401. So let me go ahead and import the status from FastAPI. So this is going to be our status, and then you can go ahead and say 401 unauthorized. So when you make that request, of course, we shall see that we are not authenticated, and therefore we need to provide the right credentials for us to proceed with that specific request. So that has been a very simple example of how we can achieve authorization or authentication using our middleware. But this is a simple example. I think I'm going to just go ahead and remove it so that we only keep our logging right here. So now that we've been able to do that, let us also look at how we can use custom middleware with FastAPI. So FastAPI is a framework that is built on top of the asynchronous gateway interface, and therefore in any middleware that can be used with ASGI can be able to work with FastAPI. FastAPI allows us to achieve that by using the add middleware decorator. Or actually, it's a method that's found on the app instance. So when you go back to our middleware right here, and let's say we have some middleware that is created from another package that is compliant with ASGI, we can go ahead and register it onto our app instance and it will be able to work. For example, let's say I wanted to add CORS or cross-origin resource sharing to allow resources be accessed from another domain from our server. We can go ahead and use the inbuilt CORS middleware that's found within FastAPI. So let's go ahead and set up CORS for our app. To do that, I'm going to go in here and first import that class. So I'll say from FastAPI.middleware. So inside here is where you can find middleware for CORS, middleware for GITHUB, middleware that can help for HTTP redirects, middleware for GZIP, WSGI, trusted hosts, and so on. And we're going to look at how to use some of these middlewares. So for our case, we can just come right here and say middleware.CORS. We can import the CORS middleware. And once we've imported the CORS middleware, to set it up, all we have to do is to go down here and call our app.add. So this is actually going to be our app in our case. Then we can add middleware, and this will take in our middleware class. So our middleware class is going to be the CORS middleware. And once we've been able to do that, then we can provide the keyword arguments or arguments that middleware takes in. Now let's go to the new line and provide those. So what we need in this case is to go ahead and provide, let's say, our allowed hosts. So when you go back in here, we see that this is going to take in a bunch of arguments. Allowed origins in this case are going to be those domains which will be allowed to access resources from our domain. Allowed methods will be the methods that will be allowed to be performed from other domains. Allowed headers that are to be sent to the request when basically performing an action on our domain. So these are things we need to go ahead and set up. If you go within our middleware, all we have to do is to go ahead and provide those. So I'm going to copy some of the stuff that we have right here, and then I'll bring it in here, but then I'll give it the values. So instead of having these typings or these type annotations, all I can do is to go ahead and remove them, and then we can go ahead and set this up. So here we can say allow credentials equals to true or false, whatever we may feel is needed. So we can say allow credentials equals to true. Allow headers, we can allow all headers by saying star. Then we can allow all methods by also saying star. So every method can be allowed to be used on our domain. and then allow origins. We can also go ahead and set up star to say that we want to allow all origins to be able to make requests to our API without getting CORS issues. So right after doing that, this is just enough for us to go ahead and use our custom middleware. We can also use the trusted host middleware. So for example, we can go to so this is going to be FastAPI.middleware.trusted middleware or trusted host. So we can go ahead and import the trusted host. So the trusted host middleware can also be added here. So this is how we set up the allowed hosts for our app, the host on which our app may be accessed. So in this case, we can go ahead and say app.add middleware, and then we can simply go ahead and set up the trusted host middleware. So this is going to take in a lot of things, just like we saw for the CORS, but we need to set up the allowed hosts. So the allowed hosts is going to be the list of domains on which our app can be accessed. So we can go ahead and set that up by saying allowed hosts, and this is going to be our allowed host. So in case you have a domain, you can just go ahead and provide it here by basically saying example.com blah blah blah.com. That's where we're going to go ahead and set it up here. So that's just how you set up a custom middleware, and this can be any ASGI middleware that you want to use within your app. So you can just go ahead and import it, then simply import that class and then use the add middleware method to go ahead and register it. Can provide its arguments just like you see right here. In this video, we've been able to look at how we can use FastAPI's middleware. We've also looked at how we can create our own custom middleware, and we've created a simple example where we went ahead and modified FastAPI's logging so that we can be able to provide more details with our logging. We've also gone ahead and looked at how we can use other modified custom middlewares that are compliant with ASGI so that we can use them with our FastAPI application. If you've enjoyed this video, I request you leave a like and please share this video with whoever it may be helpful to. Also, do not forget to click the subscribe button. My goal is to reach 10,000 subscribers this year. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to support my channel financially, please join the channel, become a member of my Patreon, and also buy me a coffee in the link down in the description. I hope to see you in the next video where we're going to be looking at API testing and documentation. Thank you for watching, guys, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.